Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing with a multiple day period of severe weather threat and storm chasing potential starting today across southern Texas. And then tomorrow, there's an ejecting preceding upper level trough that could bring severe weather and tornadoes to locations like central and southern Mississippi, maybe into Alabama as well on Sunday, late afternoon and the evening hours. And then on Monday, a massive unstable warm sector there, strongly sheared unstable warm sector, a lot of bulk shear as well, even some zones within that of some pretty strong low level shear as well. A front, inner front is going to be diving south through the southern plains, and then in front of it you have this massive area of unstable surface-based instability with a big elevated mix layer as well, punching in well ahead of the system, actually between the two troughs. The preceding one tomorrow that could bring a tornado threat to southern Mississippi. Today there could even be an outside threat of a tornado or two somewhere between San Antonio and Houston, but it does look like it's probably more of a heavy rain threat today across South Texas. So my plan is to head toward southern Mississippi tomorrow and target that area for storm chasing. There's a pretty stout low-level jet out there with a preceding wave. Then I'm going to drift a little bit north toward the Missouri boot heel, maybe play just off the Ozark Mountains there across northeastern Arkansas, southeastern Missouri, where I think there could be some pretty decent soundings. And let me show you this massive area of Cape that is being forecast by the morning NAM model. I'm going to start with the NAM, and we'll kind of oscillate between the different models of choice here as I discuss my storm chasing plan. But here's the surface-based Cape, and remember we broke down the different types of Cape as well. Mixed layer Cape, most unstable Cape. There's all different kinds of measurements. If you're looking for more for elevated supercells, most unstable Cape is a great metric. Basically, you lift a parcel from multiple layers throughout the troposphere and find which one contributes the most Cape. So if you have a lot of low-level convective inhibition, then most unstable Cape is the way to go. But since we're looking at an abundance of surface-based instability and we're actually trying to diagnose the tornado potential within this environment, we're going to use surface-based Cape, and you can see a massive area of 3,000 plus Cape here, southeastern Oklahoma, central and eastern Texas, through a large portion of the Mississippi River Valley, up through the Ohio River Valley as well, even up into the southern Great Lakes. You can see the synoptic scale warm front up there with big instability off to the south of it. So in my experience, these setups will often produce quite a few tornadoes. And again, this is on Monday, and you've got about a 30 to 40 knot low-level jet here. And even though you do have general anticyclonic curvature aloft, there is an elevated mix layer and some upper-level jet dynamics that could lead to the initiation of some prefrontal storms, some embedded jet streaks within here. You can see one of the lead mid-level jet streaks here arriving at about 21Z across the middle Mississippi River Valley here. This could certainly be enough to fire storms on the left exit region of a subtle jet between these two. You've got the departing wave through the Ohio River Valley at this time, which may or may not produce a tornado threat on Sunday, tomorrow. And the main wave lags way behind. And then in between these two, you have this massive area of instability, moisture, and dew points out there. And so this is going to be the next target. Look at this plume of 70 plus dew points surging north through the Mississippi River Valley there. Even back along the front though, southeastern Oklahoma, central and eastern Texas by 21Z. The front is right through the DFW area. So it's very possible to even get some severe weather along the front and the dry line. You can see kind of a dry line, definitely veered south-southwest to north-northeast here, not a bulging dry line by any means, but you can certainly see this big pool of moisture even residing across central and southern Illinois there. And I can definitely show you the elevated mix layer here, 500 millibar relative humidity. And look at this massive dry plume just punching in over top that moisture. You've got dew points in the upper or low 70s streaming northward through the Mississippi River Valley, and then you get this dry patch of air. When you get an elevated mix layer like this, it can steepen lapse rates aloft and lead to a prime environment for very large hail and supercell storms. I think that the strength and basically probably the level of the elevated mix layer are all really key ingredients for supercell storms and tornadoes here. And here you have an elevated mix layer that surges way to the east of the actual front. And that's why you have this massive multiple state warm sector in between those two systems on Monday. We're going to start on Monday, then work toward Sunday, and then analyze the threat across South Texas today as well. So we're kind of working backwards. But I'm most excited about this event on Monday, I think, in terms of tornado potential. Right now we're looking at the elevated mix layer here, and you could pick an area kind of within this dry punch that's coming in here, surging from southwest to northeast, off the southern Rockies, Mexican Plateau, and across the middle Mississippi River Valley, even up through portions of the southern Great Lakes. So let's just pick a sounding right in the middle there of the Missouri boot heel, and we'll be able to see visually that elevated mix layer. This is a vertical slice here. This is the sounding, and you can see this dry air punching in here in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, centered at about 3 kilometers, and that acts to steepen the lapse rates. The red line, the rate at which it decreases with height. When you get that dry punch of air coming in into the mid-levels of the atmosphere, that's exactly what that does, is it steepens the rate at which the red line decreases with height. And let me see if I can get something here to annotate for you guys. And this is a sounding right in the middle of the Missouri boot heel that we just selected, basically to highlight the elevated mix layer, or the EML as we call it. So here it is. So I can annotate this now. That's the same sounding for the Missouri boot heel at about 0Z on Monday. And the elevated mix layer is that dry air that's punching in there with the green line. This line in the sounding is dew point going up. The red line here is environmental temperature. And the dashed line is the parcel ascent. So this is basically lifting a parcel from the surface and up to the cloud base, or the LCL, which is the green line there. That's the cloud base. So you're decreasing at the dry adiabatic lapse rate until you match up with that surface mixing ratio line. And then you're decreasing at about 5.5 degrees Celsius per kilometer. That's the moist adiabatic lapse rate. And basically, if you can imagine just an infinitesimal hot air balloon lifting up through the atmosphere, as long as it's warmer than that red line at the same level, then that balloon is going to continue to go up. And that happens with an updraft inside of a thunderstorm until it gets up to the top of the storm. That's the equilibrium level up there. And then all of this area between that dashed line and the red line there is CAPE, or convective available potential energy. And when you base it all the way down to the surface, look at this low-level CAPE here too, a lot of 3-kilometer CAPE. There is a bit of a capping inversion there in the red line. So when the red line suddenly hits a warm layer, like right here, that's called an inversion, or a capping inversion. And even here at 0Z, that parcel still is able to break through the cap. At 21Z, there's a little bit more clearance there as well. You will need a jet streak, maybe a surface convergence prefrontal confluence line to help encourage supercells to form. But then once the updraft taps into this instability aloft, it's going to be an explosive updraft, certainly. And over here, the hodograph looks definitely favorable for tornadoes. You get about a 30 to 40 knot, 1 kilometer wind here out of the south-southwest. Your surface wind south-southwest at about 10 knots. That creates about 30 knots of a shear here between the 0 and 1 kilometer layer. Quite a bit of storm relative helicity there contained within the hodograph and the storm motion vector as well. So overall, this looks like quite a favorable environment for supercells, very large hail over a massive area beneath that elevated mix layer as it ejects over top those surface dew points. You can see some speed shear largely contributes that favorable hodograph shape for tornadoes. You're starting off though with a south-southwesterly surface wind, then a southwesterly low-level jet at about 40 knots just above the ground, and that's what contributes to this curved hodograph shape there. That is definitely supportive of supercell storms and large hail, especially in a thermodynamic sense. So that's Monday afternoon, and we're going to look at a few other models here as well. Let's go back here to the NAM. So the hard thing to do is to target an area within such a massive zone of instability where you think that the threat of tornadoes is just a little bit greater, and you kind of have this split jet here out ahead of the parent trough, and you could target a little bit further south across eastern Arkansas, where you might get more of a favorable jet circulation associated with a confluence line as well. That's at 0Z. But really I'm going to have to use the high resolution models and pick out the evolution of this mid-level jet streak here that's punching through the Ozarks into northeastern Arkansas, somewhere southeastern Missouri, southern Illinois out ahead of that, northeastern Arkansas, maybe even western Kentucky or Tennessee there on Monday. Could be quite favorable. And remember the composite indices. You can look at 0 to 1 kilometer EHIs here at 21Z. Seem to show the greatest co-location of that instability and low-level wind shear across the Ozarks, actually, there of Arkansas back into southeastern Oklahoma. A lot of that is largely contributed by Cape, and then you'll probably get some slightly better wind shear a little bit off to the east of that, but really it's contributed by a 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity. So it's looking like the NAM at least likes the Ozarks there at 21Z. And you can see how that low-level shear lifts northeast across eastern Missouri as you go into 0Z. So Poplar Bluff back toward north-central Arkansas certainly does look quite favorable for an isolated tornado threat. There is quite a strong capping inversion still, and you're in between these two storm systems. It's not like this upper-level storm system to the west is ejecting on Monday afternoon and evening by any means, but you definitely do have a very broad area of favorable bulk shear and instability for supercell, large hail potential, and even the threat of tornadoes anywhere from central Illinois, Indiana, to the Ohio River Valley, basically the entire state of Kentucky, Tennessee as well. Large portions of Arkansas there show quite a favorable supercell composite. Really, you can pick a sounding anywhere in this environment and justify that there could be tornado potential with that, even out here into Kentucky. Look at that big looping hodograph. 1 kilometer wind south-southwest at about 30 knots, and then you've got some decent mid and upper level flow as well there. And you've got quite a favorable Cape profile. Your elevated mix layer off to the east over Kentucky and Tennessee isn't quite as favorable the further east you go, but you still have plenty of Cape even without a massive elevated mix layer like that. So that's one reason why you might want to favor the western side of this massive instability axis, is because of that penetrating elevated mix layer that punches across the central Mississippi River Valley there. Factoring in significant tornado parameter composites. Definitely kind of splits this target area into two different zones with some decent wind shear off to the east across eastern Kentucky to the east of that elevated mix layer, then off to the west over the Ozarks of Arkansas and Missouri. Look to have the most favorable shear profiles. And look at that elevated mix layer off in the west. I think that the thing is, there's a very large environment favoring supercell storms. I wouldn't even necessarily believe the big holes there that are being depicted by the NAM. Looking at the 3 kilometer NAM now, also favors the Ozarks out here as expected into western Kentucky, central southern Indiana for some tornado potential. See where, and you can see it's the elevated mix layer is just arriving there, but kind of a big, broad, looping hodograph. Areas like Paducah, Evansville, even up toward Indianapolis need to keep an eye out for this event. Really, any surface-based storm out there is probably going to produce very large hail and even have tornado potential. This is a pretty favorable hodograph there as well for tornadoes. And look at this huge area of quite favorable 0 to 1 kilometer helicity too at 0Z. So really any storm that goes up in this environment is going to have isolated tornado potential on Monday, late afternoon and evening over a large multiple state area, southeastern Missouri, back into central Arkansas, the entire state of Kentucky, Tennessee, Keep an eye out too around Indianapolis. I could see some sneaky wind shear there as well. Definitely some favorable photographs. So there's going to be a massive area with tornado and large hail potential. And I'm going to, of course, be chasing this. The key is just to try to find some subtle jet streaks or impulses within that environment that could be enough to trigger some storms. This is the 12Z GFS upper level pattern for Monday afternoon. Let's compare it to the NAM. It does seem to be just a little bit more progressive too. GFS does, which would push that elevated mix layer even further off to the east. And you can see this general anticyclonic curvature, though, over that very massive warm sector. So even though the indices are showing a huge environment that's favorable for supercell storms, you're still going to need some type of a subtle trigger mechanism to get those storms to form. Back in East Texas, out ahead of the parent trough, as depicted by the GFS here, that will aid initiation of storms. Looks like there could be some preceding impulses as well ahead of that trough, in between the trough and this large subtropical or large anticyclone down here in the subtropics. So really you're going to have to look for those subtle jet streaks if you want to play the open warm sector on Monday, but then back closer to Texas, at least as depicted by the more progressive GFS. You do have some decent wind shear down there, but still the core of the low-level jet right in between those two zones and co-located with that anticyclonic curvature aloft. But if a storm can get going here, the models have been hinting at these embedded mid and upper level impulses in the jet stream moving over top that very large warm sector. So I do think that there's going to be a large number of severe weather reports, large hail, southeastern Oklahoma, eastern Texas, and all the way through the middle Mississippi River Valley with the ejection of that EML. And here you can see that large EML as well in the GFS. The NAM model, both NAMs are all showing the evolution of this elevated mix layer punching in to the Mississippi River Valley, and that's why it's gonna bring a severe weather threat along with it. Definitely the NAM initiates some storms too back in the front, eastern Texas into southeastern Oklahoma. And the environment is quite favorable for tornadoes across the Ozarks too, of Arkansas into southern Missouri there. But much more favorable chase terrain just to the east of the Ozarks there across southeastern Missouri and northeastern Arkansas. Large area of favorable bulk shear as well out there with 35 knots here at 500 millibars, increasing as you go further west. The bulk shear closer to the front there across southeastern Oklahoma. And there you can hear the tornado sirens getting tested this Saturday here in Norman. Let's go back and let's look at Sunday now, which is tomorrow. Here across Mississippi, look at this lead wave that's lifting off to the east tomorrow. That's what I'm going to be targeting. I have to wake up at about 4 a.m. here from Oklahoma to work this Vort Max, which is going to be deepening over central and southern Arkansas. Plume of 50 knot 500 millibar winds out ahead of it here across central and southern Mississippi. And it's associated with a strong low-level jet as well. Look at that low-level jet of 35 to 40 knots central southern Mississippi there, centered across the Mississippi River Valley. Definitely will be keeping a very close eye on this. I'm going to have to leave relatively early in the day to get down there. As we've got the tornado siren sounding in the background. And it looks like down near Jackson, and you can see this warm front lifting northward, surging northward through the Mississippi River Valley. And then in its wake, you've got that 40 knot low-level jet over top of this. Southern Mississippi there, southeastern Louisiana, definitely southeastern Arkansas, eastern Louisiana certainly could be a hot spot. This is just 0 to 1 kilometer EHI to show you that co-location of the surface-based instability with low-level shear. So the NAM is certainly depicting a pretty substantial event tomorrow afternoon across central and southern Mississippi, as well as southeastern Arkansas, large portion of eastern Louisiana in general. The strongest low-level shear at 4 p.m. is going to be in central Mississippi. So locations like Yazoo City, down toward Jackson, up toward Greenville, even northeastern Arkansas, up toward Jonesboro areas. Certainly do need to keep a very close eye on this threat tomorrow. And this is definitely chaseable. This warm frontal zone here has some of the strongest low-level shear as well, in combination with that surface-based instability. And quite a favorable hodograph. This one looks to be a little bit contaminated. See how it's saturated all the way up? That means that it's inside of a storm there. So we'll throw that sounding out. And you can see the 3-kilometer NAM suggests a convective line forming down there, central southern Mississippi. Let's shimmy on over to the HRRR model and see what its convective evolution is. This is at 21Z. Looks like it has a couple HP supercell storms already in progress across far southern Mississippi here by 21Z. That could choke off that low-level jet a little bit, kind of focusing and pinching off that severe weather threat down across southern Mississippi into southeastern Louisiana here. So even though the NAM model shows a much cleaner warm sector out here with that warm front lifting up into central Mississippi, low-level jet along with it, the HRRR seems to have storms riding a confluence line down here across southern Mississippi into southeastern Louisiana, where they often set up with these setups. And going toward 21Z, you'll see that low-level jet start to increase across southeastern Louisiana, punching into southern Mississippi. I'm guessing that the surface-based instability is going to be pinched off across southern Mississippi in this model, and it definitely is on the HRRR here. So the NAM would argue definitely chase tomorrow, southern Mississippi, even into Alabama. The HRRR, though, shows a more complicated thermodynamic evolution with more complexes of overnight storms kind of pinching off that warm sector. You can see a recovery of that warm sector, though, across Louisiana, a little bit back to the west. But you really are kind of focused on the coastal plain here of Mississippi, Alabama, Mobile, working its way into the western Florida panhandle with this setup. Still 15 knots at 1 kilometer lagging back toward the Houston area, but the best low-level wind shear looks like it's going to be southeastern Louisiana, even the New Orleans area into southern Mississippi, if this evolution is correct in the HRRR here. We're going to have to look at the models tonight and see if the NAM's going to win out, or if you're going to have to go all the way down into southern Mississippi, like Hammond up toward Wiggins areas here across southeastern Louisiana into southern Mississippi. Certainly could be a hot spot tomorrow if you believe the HRRR. The NAM doesn't really have the dominance of these earlier storms as much, has more of a clean warm sector, but you can see this morning into afternoon, the HRRR is showing a massive complex, an MCS, moving into central southern Mississippi here. Probably be some tornado warnings late morning already along the I-10 corridor down toward Lafayette. If this model verifies, definitely could be some favorable wind shear just ahead of that line too down into southeastern Louisiana. We'll have to keep an eye on that. So based on what I'm seeing here, I'm going to analyze the models tonight, and then I'll either leave at 3 in the morning and then target southern Mississippi, southeastern Louisiana, and then head north toward Jonesboro, or I'll just pickle off to the east on I-40 and then target north central Arkansas into south central Missouri up toward Poplar Bluff, maybe work the Missouri boot heel on Monday, and then drop in and see Gizmo in a couple days in between. A very active May that's coming ahead. And I'm going to go over some of the long-range sub-seasonal forecasting tools that we use too. I'm going to do that in a Storm Chase EDU course coming up once I get back to my mom's place. Those are going to resume next week after these next chases. And then we'll look at some of the ensemble methods, some of the forecast methods using the MJO Some of the basically an oscillation that happens with the upper level jet from being a buckled jet to basically zonal flow from west to east across the U.S. And also the way that those waves set up when the jet stream buckles matters. You need to have the troughing across the western U.S. With the ridge off in the southeastern U.S. An anticyclone and the squeeze play between those two results in a strong low-level jet across multiple states. And right now, it looks like starting the second week of May, there's going to be an incredibly active severe weather pattern. That's what happens during the peak season during May. Today is May 1st. Happy May, everybody. And it looks like, based on the long-range models, that the Central and Southern Plains, Tornado Alley, is going to wake up in a big way starting the second week in May. And we can also look at today. So southern Texas, boy, not a lot of low-level shear out there, that's for sure, across the southern Texas hill country. Not a lot of recovery. You do get a little bit maybe channeling up the Galveston Bay there, creating just a little pocket of some favorable shear this afternoon near the Houston area with some non-zero, 0 to 3 kilometer EHIs down there. And I'm looking for recovery back across South Texas, back behind this thing. This afternoon, you do have a decent low-level jet across central southern Texas. You could start off the day near the San Antonio area, work that I-10 corridor between San Antonio and Houston, where you do have this southeasterly low-level jet here ahead of it, creating some non-zero low-level shear there. There is a cutoff system that's going to be ejecting tomorrow as well across Mississippi. This is it right now. Cutoff centered right over Del Rio by this afternoon. Closed low. It is cut off from the jet a bit here, and it does get picked up and then ejects off to the northeast. Tomorrow, across southern Mississippi, southeastern Louisiana, a complex of storms is going to form overnight tonight. The HRRR thinks that complex of storms is going to limit how far north the destabilization lifts tomorrow. But the NAM is pretty aggressive with that warm front lifting all the way north into central Mississippi, bringing with it quite a bit of wind shear. But today you've got a decent mid-level flow over top that 35-knot southeasterly low-level jet. So somewhere here, maybe even to the west of Houston, between Houston and San Antonio, looks like some pretty favorable, at least kinematic, conditions there for supercell storms. But I do think that this setup is going to be a little bit limited by how much surface heating can happen. Look at this massive zone cleared out by a complex of storms that has brought a lot of heavy rain to the Houston area. Big sweeping area, reduced surface-based instability here. But if some pockets of heating can happen between San Antonio and Houston, then I do think that there is a chance of some surface-based storms, maybe near College Station. Got a marginal severe sounding here, but you do have some easterlies at the low levels, flipping around to southwesterly aloft. A lot of moisture, very deep moisture out there. But really the best kinematic environment, there's kind of a hole there in the surface-based instability across southern and southeastern Texas. Even though you've got these mid to upper 60s dew points, your surface temperatures are just really held down by a ton of cloud cover out there. Down into the 70s. Look at this pocket of stable air. And it's really cloudy in central Oklahoma too. Up here, temperatures near 70. Big stratus deck is in place. So I hope everybody got out and enjoyed the nice weather yesterday across Oklahoma. Now you've got this cutoff system centered over Del Rio right now. That is leading to a general isentropic lift and some cloud cover across the southern plains. Just some kind of nasty weather on this Saturday. Still good enough weather to play basketball, though. So we're going to probably try to play a little basketball this afternoon. But yeah, really the best kinematic environment. You've got a lot of a stabilizing effect this afternoon across southeastern Texas. The HRRR is pretty underwhelming, but I do think there is a tornado threat tomorrow southeastern Louisiana, southern Mississippi that I'm going to keep a close eye on, that I might chase. And then I'll probably head to the north and then work this area across northern Arkansas, southeastern Missouri on May 3rd on my way back toward Gizmo, who's located in upstate South Carolina. And then Monday does look like the biggest day. Here's some of the artwork we were creating earlier at the beginning of this severe weather briefing. Large front. It's going to be sliding off to the south and drifting off to the east a little bit. We'll have to decide between playing down here across northeast Texas, southeastern Oklahoma into western Arkansas, or playing this target across north central Arkansas into south central Missouri, or way out ahead of everything across the warm frontal zone just to the south of there, maybe across central Indiana down to the Ohio River Valley. But tonight I'm going to be, and especially through the day on Sunday, I'm going to be looking for those little subtle impulses and also the progression of the elevated mix layer, but really the subtle jet streaks there in the mid and upper levels to try to pinpoint those little small mesoscale areas of lift, maybe some prefrontal confluence lines that could fire some storms. I'm also going to keep in mind some of the terrain influences out here, maybe some lift provided by the terrain, by the Ozarks there as well could aid in the initiation of storms. But definitely storm chase mode is about to be activated, everybody. Have a great rest of your Saturday, and never stop chasing.